from the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide. In Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Competition Policy, Antitrust, and Consumer Rights, Senator Amy Klobuchar makes her case against some of the biggest U.S. tech giants of our time, monopolies, antitrust, and more in our one-on-one interview. Plus, space. It is Amazon's next big push as the company expects a surge in space-related cloud computing contracts with the market size estimated at hundreds of billions of dollars. We'll find out more. And the software design firm now worth $10 billion. We will meet the co-founder and CEO of Figma, who believes creative collaboration can happen from anywhere. All those stories in a moment, but first, a rare bit of bipartisan support out of Washington, where President Biden celebrated a tentative deal with a group of Democrats and Republican senators on a $579 billion infrastructure plan. He says it's now moving forward on two tracks.
We'll see what happens in a reconciliation bill in the budget process. If we get some compromise there, and if we can't, see if I can attract all the Democrats to a position that is there, but they're gonna move in a dual track.
Let's see how it's all playing out in the markets with our Ed Ludlow. Ed, take it away.
Yeah, fresh record highs for the S&P 500 and NASDAQ 100. Slight outperformance in technology shares with that tech-heavy index up by 0.6%. A weaker dollar, static yields on the benchmark 10-year Treasury note. In terms of the names catching a bid, if we look at the companies on the move, it's those companies that will benefit from the economic reopening, the infrastructure spending. Caterpillar up by the most since mid-March, the highest level since in 10 days. And of course, this is a company that is the biggest maker of infrastructure equipment in the world, right? No wonder it's higher on optimism for an infrastructure bill. Also gaining Tesla, really strong performance, up 10% over the last 3 sessions, its highest level in almost 2 months. And in terms of cryptocurrencies, no clear driver, but green across the board for cryptocurrencies. We do know Citigroup is going to start offering a digital assets product to its high net worth customers. Emily.
All right, Ed Ludlow, thanks for the roundup. Meantime, the House on day 2 of that lengthy debate over new legislation to challenge big tech. Now, the question is, what will the Senate do? Senator Amy Klobuchar has laid out a big vision to reform antitrust law and take on companies like Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google. I sat down with Senator Klobuchar to ask about the realities of getting new legislation passed and what she sees that's so problematic about some of the world's most so-called innovative companies.
We've got some great products that are out there, and no one wants to get rid of them, whether it's Fitbits, whether it's iPhones, whether it is being able to order your groceries online. So let's start with that. And these companies have done very well. I am pleased that they've been successful and employed a bunch of Americans. But at the same time, our country has always rejuvenated capitalism. We've always said, okay, these are good products like we did with AT&T, but at some point, if there's no competition, these companies are allowed to become these monopolistic, dominant providers. And in the case of AT&T, no one wanted to destroy AT&T. They just wanted to make sure that new competitors can develop, like at the time MCI. It brought long distance rates down. We got the cell phone market to go from one big cell phone that fit in like Gordon Gekko's briefcase in that old movie Wall Street to where we are today. I think we need to look at it the same way. You have got situations where you'll have gateway companies that dominate so that they can literally tell people who want to advertise on them, in the case of Google or Facebook, look, I'm sorry, we're going to charge you for that. We just had a big story on app stores with Apple and Google and found out that they're charging Spotify or Match.com 30% of their revenues that come in, but they don't charge it to other big companies. They get to pick. I just don't think that's how a competitive marketplace works. So I look at it as, I love capitalism, but I always believe that you need to put some guards around it when it comes to ensuring capitalism works. And by the way, I'm not alone in this. Adam Smith, the godfather of capitalism and theory related to economics that our founding fathers subscribed to, he said the same thing. He said, yes, we want to have capitalism, but always watch out for what he called the standing armies of monopolies. That's why we have the Sherman Act. That's why we have the Clayton Act. And we need to be as sophisticated as the companies and the CEOs that run them when it comes to making sure we're fostering new entrants in the market.
When you look at Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, do you see monopolies? Where do you see the best case for regulatory action or breakup?
I think everything has to be on the table. And by the way, it's not just tech. You see the same thing in online travel, in pharma. You see some of it in the ag industry. And so you look at each industry as it is. And in this case, there were a bunch of decisions made over the years that allowed for things like Facebook buying WhatsApp and Instagram. Now, when we look back at it and we read Mark Zuckerberg's emails where he said we'd rather buy than compete, and another one where he said, well, nascent competitors, but one day they could be disruptive to us, and then goes out and buys them. Tech is supposed to be about disruption. In a way, economic capitalism is about disruption because you get new market entrants. And so that's why you have to both change the standards, I believe, for looking at mergers going forward, give the money, invest in our enforcers. By the way, they bring a bunch of money back for the taxpayers when you allow them to do their jobs. And then finally, look back at some of these industries, not all of them, but look back at the ones where you see gatekeepers or highly concentrated power. And yes, breakups, divestiture of some assets should always be on the table. Make sure the consent decrees that were agreed to in the past are actually being enforced. And the whole idea is not to punish success. The whole idea is to make sure we have more success in the future.
Now, your antitrust approach would strengthen antitrust legislation across industries. The House is taking a much more specific approach targeted at a handful of the tech companies that we're talking about. You've said you plan to introduce smaller bills as well. Specifically, will you introduce a companion bill to Representative Cicilline's proposal, to Representative Jayapal's proposal?
Yes, we're looking at all of those, and they have already put forth companion bills to some of my proposals, including increasing the merger fees, which has, by the way, been marked up, passed through the committee. And we expect that it'll pass through the House because it's already passed through the Senate. That's over $100 million to the agencies to hire lawyers to take on the biggest companies the world has ever known. I am seriously in discussions with the Republicans about a number of their proposals. I think you will see companion bills. They may not be identical, but very similar. I commend Representative Cicilline for what he's done and am very supportive. I think we also need, and I know he does, believe this, to look at other industries as well. So to me, given that we are a small but mighty group that works on this, both Democrats and Republicans, we don't believe there's a monopoly on good ideas when we're dealing with monopolies. We've been very good, including Representative Buck and Senator Lee, about trying to work together on this and finding where we have common ground. And that means tech-specific bills, but it also means broader bills.
The White House has said the president is encouraged by the bipartisan work on these issues. I know that that's been really important to you, but Republicans and Democrats seem to want action on big tech, often for different reasons. And I'm curious, how far does that bipartisanship go? Where could that break down when it comes to Republicans?
Well, they're going to have to look at all of the bills and make decisions. Obviously, some of them are coming at tech from a different place than I am. I mean, I don't agree with them that there's some kind of bias politically with tech. But I've been actually very impressed at some of our hearings that that's not what they've been emphasizing. When we had the hearing on home technology about Amazon and Google, that wasn't the subject of the discussions. It was more monopolies. The App Store hearing almost entirely focused on what's going on with potential abuse of monopoly power. So I'm hoping we can come together on this instead of going off on tangents in the arguments for taking this on. And I think the proof is in the pudding. Several bipartisan bills in the House, bipartisan work in the Senate, already passed the Senate with increasing the merger fees on all mergers, bipartisan work on taking on the ability of newspapers and news organizations to be able to combine their negotiating power against tech, given that we've seen closures of newspapers at an alarming rate, breaking down the entire investigative process at the local level that we need to maintain a democracy. That's bipartisan in both houses. I lead the bill in the Senate with Senator Kennedy. There's a lot of bipartisan work going on. So, and then you have the Biden administration putting in Lena Khan and Tim Wu, Merrick Garland, who used to teach antitrust, understands the issues well. I think all of that bodes well for actually moving ahead on this with both branches of government.
There's this revelation from ProPublica today, Senator Klobuchar, that Peter Thiel accumulated $5 billion in a Roth IRA that was named after a senator to create a retirement account for the middle class. This is in part on investments in Facebook. What's your level of outrage on this? And does Congress need to act?
Well, I think in general, and I'll take it even outside of that, there are just too many people that have been using things that are maybe well-meant in the tax code or many times not well-meant, and they use it to make a lot of money at the expense of other people. It's just not fair. That's why as a presidential candidate and in my role as a U.S. Senator, I have advocated and will continue to advocate for changes to the tax code. I completely disagreed that the corporate rate should go all the way down to 21%. There were some of us in the middle, even when Trump was president, saying, why don't we go to, if you're going to go down, at least go to 25, 26%. You've got outrageous situations with carried interest and with other parts of the tax codes that has allowed the wealthy to get wealthier. You lose respect for the government when you're an average citizen out there, a taxpayer, and we don't want that breakdown of trust. We lose money that we should be bringing in to pay for really important services. And then to make matters worse, they have so much lobbying power, and then people basically fall prey to their lobbying efforts, and that includes tech. It's all a bad synergy, and I think the time has come to put the truth out there, and I'm glad that President Biden's been willing to talk about changing elements of the tax code that are just simply unfair. And the use of the Roth IRA, the Roth provisions in this way, to me, is just one more example of that.
My exclusive interview there with Senator Amy Klobuchar. We'll be watching for that bipartisanship. Coming up, Space Gets Smart. We're taking a look at how Amazon Web Services is providing Earth-to-space services for their customers, including NASA, and the future of the space cloud. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Well, it is not only rockets powering the space race, with Jeff Bezos planning to take off on Blue Origin's first voyage carrying human passengers. Amazon itself is also plotting its own future in the race to own the space cloud. Amazon Web Services has a growing space business dedicated to serving customers like NASA and missions that involve going all the way to Mars. Joining me now, Clint Crozier, AWS Director of Aerospace and Satellite Solutions, and also retired Major General in the Air Force and Space Force. Major General, thank you so much for joining us. I think a lot of people don't realize AWS's role in space and the burgeoning space cloud. Talk to us about the customers you're working with and the missions that you're helping to carry out.
Yeah, Emily, thanks very much for having us here on Bloomberg Technology tonight. We appreciate that. So it's really interesting. Space is really at a dynamic inflection point, and it's such an exciting time to be part of the space industry. And we're seeing epic and dynamic change, and we're seeing rapid growth, including growth of all the ways that we're using space data around the world to support life here on Earth, from climate control to disaster response and humanitarian, transportation, economics, everything in between. But at the heart of it, what's really interesting is the future of space is data-driven. It's about collecting data, more data than we've ever had before coming down from space. It's about processing, managing, organizing, distributing that data. And those are the things that AWS is really, really good at, doing all that at scope and scale with speed and in a cost-effective manner. And so that really resonates with our space customers. It's about data management and data processing at its heart.
You know, I've talked to Bill Gates and he said, look, it's great that Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are exploring space, but I'm focused on making life better on Earth. What's your response to that? I mean, you guys have this huge space accelerator program for startups working in space. What will we get out of exploring the great beyond?
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's really interesting because we too are focused on ways that we can use space to make life better here on Earth, making the world a better place from space, as we like to say. So we're working with a company right now today, Fireball International. Fireball is using space data and AWS advanced cloud processing capabilities to identify wildfire breakouts in remote areas within 3 minutes of ignition and then automatically vectoring crews in. So think about environmental management when you can tell within minutes when a fire breaks out in a remote area before it gets out of control and it burns out of control. So those are things we're seeing today. With our Space Accelerator, what's really interesting about that is we put out a call to space startups around the globe, and we were looking for companies that had innovative ideas about how to solve big problems that we face in the future. And so what we were looking for is companies that had big problems in the space industry that they wanted to tackle and had an appreciation of how the AWS cloud could help do that. And so we chose companies aligned on that principle. So for instance, Satellite View is a company out of the United Kingdom that's tackling climate control and climate change. And they're using AWS in the cloud and space to monitor thermal emissions from man-made objects on Earth to help manage climate change.
Now, Amazon's Project Kuiper has been competing with SpaceX's Starlink for these low orbit satellites that are supposedly going to improve broadband and internet access here on Earth. What's the vision for Project Kuiper, given that the satellites have yet to launch?
Yeah, well, Project Kuiper is a really interesting mission. It's a slightly different part of the Amazon family than AWS, but in a nutshell, the mission is to provide global broadband capability around the world to disadvantaged users in LEO, in low Earth orbit, and that's a really important mission set. Kuiper is one of our customers. We're supporting them as we do hundreds of other space customers, helping solve problems here on Earth and helping us explore our universe.
All right, Clint Crozier of Amazon Web Services. Fascinating to hear what you guys are working on and how the space cloud is growing. Director of Aerospace and Satellite Solutions. Clint, thanks so much for joining us. All right, coming up, during the age of direct listings and SPAC, Confluent has hit the public market with a traditional IPO and a 25% or so pop. We'll talk to CEO Jay Krebs next. This is Bloomberg. Software maker Confluent is the latest enterprise tech company to hit the public markets. Shares rising 25% on the NASDAQ on opening day, valuing the company at $9 billion, double its valuation a year ago. Joining us now to discuss, Confluent CEO Jay Krebs. Jay, thanks so much for joining us. So you got the pop, not too big, not too small. We've seen a lot of direct listings, a lot of SPACs lately. Why take the traditional IPO route, and why now?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. You know, we were going after a $50 billion market, and we wanted to raise some capital as part of becoming a public company to really go after the opportunity. And this is the tried and true way to do that. So it made a ton of sense for us, and we were really happy with the outcome.
Now, Confluent has developed streaming technology that helps process massive amounts of data online. This was critical during the pandemic, but now that the world is coming out of lockdown, people are going back to work. Will we need that kind of technology as much?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think no company in the world is looking at the digital side of their business and thinking, hey, this isn't so important. You know, even with people going, you know, into in-person experiences, if you look at retail or many other businesses, the digital and the in-person is really blending. And there's a whole software side of businesses that really demands, you know, real-time access to data, real-time processing. And that's what this whole area of data in motion is all about. And that's what we enable.
Well, speaking of this whole era of data immersion, we've seen a rise in cyber attacks, increasing severity of these cyber attacks. How big a threat is that? And what are you doing to secure your customers in this ever-evolving world?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. You know, one of the things that drives customers to want to work with us is they're really starting to think about how they use data in a structured way so it can be secure, so they can really analyze how it flows between different systems. And that's a big advantage of something like Confluent, is it really makes all the flow of data within an organization more structured, easier to reason about, and more secure.
So where do you see the most room for growth, given that obviously the threat landscape is constantly changing, needs are constantly changing, and this whole remote work situation is still a massive experiment?
Well, look, this is a new category that's just emerging. And so we're just getting started. We think there's a $50 billion opportunity. And we think this can really grow into a massive data platform in companies where it acts like the central nervous system attaching to all the different databases, applications they would have, and connecting it all together. So we're still in the very early days of that at Confluent. We've obviously built a business we're very excited about so far, but there's a ton left to do.
So talk to us about what's next. Talk to us about the 10-year plan.
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said, the world of data has been all about storage, these piles of data sitting in databases and file systems. But really now, data is something that's really helping to run businesses. It's helping deliver customer experiences. It's driving the operations of companies. And so the vision we have is we think in each of these companies, there's going to be a central nervous system that ties it all together in real time and lets companies act on that and be smarter, more intelligent in how they do their business. And so we're growing into that role, and we think it's a huge opportunity. We think there's a whole set of adjacent opportunities around it. That's what we're trying to make true.
And, obviously it's a really interesting time to become a public company, lots of interesting market dynamics. How do you not get distracted by those dynamics, given that now that you're a public company, there are many more factors that you can't control?
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, one of the things I always say to the team is, for a company to really be great over time, you have to execute in the short term and you have to execute over the long term, and you have to keep your eye on both. And so anything, of course, stock price goes up and down every day. There's a ton of things we have to get done quarter to quarter. But we also have to plot this longer path towards what we're trying to make true in the world. And it's hard to do both of those things at the same time. But any company that does something great has to do that. And so that's the challenge for us.
All right. Jay Krebs, CEO of Confluent, newly public company. Thanks so much for taking the time. All right, coming up, Microsoft's Windows getting a big upgrade. We're going to take a look at all the new features and why gaming and cybersecurity are top of mind. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Let's get back to the markets and movers with Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow, who's looking at self-driving cars. Ed, what are you seeing?
Yeah, this is Lidar maker Luminar. This is a Florida Bay Area-based company that struck a deal with Volvo to provide Lidar sensors for its next generation of EV SUV. You can see what investors thought about it. The stock popping 6.8% on Thursday, at one point being up 12.8%, the most in around 3 weeks. It's really fascinating, the details. Basically, this electric SUV, the XC90, coming from Swedish car maker Volvo in 2022. At first, the LiDARs are going to be just to boost additional safety features like emergency braking, driver assistance, things like that. But later, Volvo plans a highway pilot. Does that sound familiar? Like Tesla's autopilot, basically a self-driving software that will combine the sensors with Volvo's own software. Now, you might remember the name Luminar. We broke a story a few weeks ago, Emily, about how Tesla was testing some Luminar LiDARs for use to benchmark its own self-driving system, which is very camera-centric. Obviously, lots of different players in this space taking different approaches, but clearly investors paying attention to Luminar. And if you look at the deals in the space, it's been active. This is data from CB Insights. Over the last few years, up until the end of 2020, the amount of deal-making going on in the autonomous space is massive. And I'm looking curiously to how it grows from this point on. This data also includes the companies working on some of the components themselves, including LiDAR. So it's definitely a space to watch going forward.
All right, Ed, lots of moves. Thanks for breaking it down. All right, Ludlow. Meantime, Windows is getting a big upgrade. Microsoft has announced it's launching Windows 11. This update aimed at improving the remote work and gaming experience, along with new security features.
Today marks a major milestone in the history of Windows. It's the beginning of a new generation. I'm excited by what we have shown you today and how we are reimagining everything, from the operating system itself to the browser to the store and the feed.
Joining me now for more on the launch, Yusuf Mehdi, Microsoft Corporate Vice President, who's behind this new generation of Windows. Yusuf, good to have you back on the show. Why the redesign? What's driving this?
Well, a big part of what we were trying to do, Emily, is we're trying to put people at the center of their entire computing experience to help them, inspire their creativity. And so a big part of what we felt like over the last year, we've learned the PC has never been more central in our lives. And the new Windows 11 is designed to do just that, to help you with a new simplified experience, help you connect to the people you care about, stay abreast of all the information, and ultimately get, more apps, more games, more entertainment to be able to accomplish all the things that you want.
Now, I know Microsoft and Satya have been big proponents of remote work, of hybrid work. How does this, or how will this improve the remote work experience?
Well, one of the great things about Windows 11 and why we believe it will be super for hybrid scenarios is a couple things. One, we've done a bunch of work to create a new capability so that you can video call, chat, even text message people from right off the desktop. That lets you work really remotely or in person in a more robust way. Second thing is we've done a lot of work with how Windows itself works when you dock and undock between your computers and your big screens. It keeps all of your layouts together. And through cloud-powered and AI, we're able to keep your files wherever you go. So anytime you sit down at a machine and log in, all of your data is right there.
And what are the new security features? Obviously, the cyber threats are rising in volume and severity. Microsoft itself has been targeted. How does this make customers more secure?
Well, a big thing that we did in Windows 11 is push to have a much more secure system, and we go from the chip on your PC all the way up to the cloud. We've essentially raised the baseline security, mechanisms in Windows to protect, so that we can, protect your data, protect your privacy in ways that we haven't been able to do before. It goes much, much farther. This is the most secure Windows we've ever released.
Now, there's a lot of scrutiny on big tech right now. I just interviewed Senator Amy Klobuchar earlier in the show. You're doing things like bundling Teams into Windows. You're making changes to the App Store. Are you thinking about this rising scrutiny from Washington as you make these changes to make sure that you don't draw the attention of regulators?
Yes, here at Microsoft, we are always thinking about what is the role of technology in the world, and what role do we as a company play. We think there are a lot of important issues that we need to be a leader on, whether that's responsible AI or, as you were just mentioning, the role of innovation. Are we creating enough platforms and enough opportunities for people to come and create? With Windows, we have always tried to do that. We believe we're putting forth one of the most open platforms for development. And with Windows 11, we're taking another step forward through a bunch of big, new improvements, one of which is in the store. You can now allow anyone to come and bring their commerce engine and sell within our store. So, for example, if you're Adobe, you can bring Creative Cloud, you can sell subscriptions, and you keep all of the revenue. That's something that's unique and distinct from other platforms. We do the same thing with how we're working with Teams. So the ability now to text message not only an Android phone or an iOS phone, but both. That's also unique. And ultimately, as always, we'll allow any apps to run on the platform. So Slack, Zoom, you name it, we want them to be on the platform. We want them to run great. We're going to do every bit we can to make sure that we have the most open platform for developers and creators.
And if I'm a gamer, why should I be excited?
So the PC has always been the home to gaming. In Windows 11, we take it another level forward. There's a bunch of performance improvements. Games load faster. The worlds and the games you play are going to be much more immersive and rich. And then with Xbox Game Pass, you'll now get over 100 games that you can play with one subscription. Think of it as like a Netflix for gaming. We'll put that on there on the PC as well. So there's never been a better time to be a gamer on Windows 11.
All right, Yusuf Mehdi, Microsoft Corporate Vice President, will be watching for that big upgrade to Windows. Thank you. Meantime, Google has pushed out its timeline to remove so-called cookies in its Chrome browser. The company first pledged to get rid of cookies last year, or browser tracking data within 2 years. But in a blog post, a Chrome engineering director wrote that cookies will now be phased out late 2023. These trackers have helped create an enormous industry of web advertising, which Google leads, but it also created widespread privacy concerns. The news provided some short-term relief for advertising tech companies that use the data to sell targeted ads online. All right, coming up. What is Figma? It is the fast-growing software company shaking up the world of design, now valued at $10 billion. We'll talk to co-founder and CEO Dylan Field next. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Gurman, your resident Apple and tech devices expert at Bloomberg, and I've got some exciting news for you today. We've launched Power On, an online and email newsletter filled with Apple scoops, product reviews, as well as insights and analysis into both Apple and the larger tech industry. Best of all, it will hit your inbox every Sunday, giving you a great start to the week. Anyone can sign up for Power On, but Bloomberg.com subscribers will get early access, as well as see their questions and my answers featured weekly in the newsletter. I'm looking forward to all of you signing up and interacting with you online.
You all know you don't want to miss those scoops from Mark Gurman. All right, well, design has become an ever more important part of the user experience, the products and services that all companies are delivering, putting Figma in a sweet spot. The software maker that's been disrupting the world of creative collaboration has just raised new funding, putting its valuation at $10 billion, which is 5 times more than what it was worth last year. I want to bring in Dylan Field, Figma co-founder and CEO. Dylan, great to have you with us. Thank you so much for stopping by. So Figma has been really disrupting the world of design, and I'm curious what makes it so special. What makes it stand out from competitors like Adobe, which, to be fair, does many things, but also is trying to do what you do?
Yeah, like you were saying, design has been really on a tear the last decade. And I think that we're just on the start of that. It's been amazing to see the way that as we've kind of had cloud services, app stores, everyone's able to distribute software better now, and developer tools are getting better and better. So the higher world now cares about, can you make something really well designed? If you can win. If you can't, you might lose in business. And as it happens, more people want to be involved in the design process. And so people want to collaborate. That's where Figma comes in. We're a design platform that lets you collaborate with designers and also get more involved in design. And so our core product makes it so you can create things like interfaces on your phone for apps or websites or visual materials. And then we also just launched FigJam, which is a digital whiteboard tool made for really the era of hybrid and remote work that we're now in.
And it's not just the user interface design that's happening on Figma. People are using it to do interior design and plan weddings. Talk to me about some of these other use cases.
Yeah, we actually, my wife and I planned our wedding on Figma. Yeah, we're seeing everything from brainstorming ideation to creating cities together, all the way to people, experimenting with, like when Slack went down, people started chatting in Figma. Really anything visual that you can imagine, whether it's slide decks or interface design or whatever, it can be done there, and so people will do it, which is really neat to see.
That actually brings me to a question that I had planned to ask a bit later, but given the chatting that's happening in Figma, the collaborating that's happening in Figma, do you see yourself taking on a company like Slack in other ways beyond design? No,
not at all. Like, we're really focused on creativity, visual communication. I mean, our vision for Figma is how do we make design accessible to everyone? And so that's what we're trying to do, is try to make it so that everyone can be involved in this design process, because if you think about it, especially over the last year with COVID, we've gone from a really physical economy to a digital economy. And it's really important that everyone in the world is able to access that digital economy. And so how can we make it so that more people are able to join in for that?
Okay, so $10 billion, 5 times as much as last year. Why is it worth that?
Well, I mean, it's been a really crazy year. And we're very fortunate. The team has been working super hard. We've had a lot of launches, a lot of traction. I think that it's been a hard year for many, and I'm very thankful for the progress we've made in the past year.
So speaking of that, the pandemic really accelerated this digital transformation and made so many people realize this need to have tools that enable us to collaborate remotely. But are we going to need those kinds of tools as much as the world goes back to work, as we all come out of lockdown and we're doing a lot of different things, not just sitting in front of our computer?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that we're going back into a hybrid world. I don't think that people are going back entirely into offices. Some might, but even the ones that do, I think will often have employees at the office some days, and some days they won't have them there. And so whether you're remote, you're hybrid, you're in person, Figma makes tools that will work for you. And we're trying to make it so that we're able to help people just be more effective in general.
Now, you have an interesting story. You were a Teal Fellow. You dropped out of school, college, to start the company, I believe. What are the things that you've learned along the way? What sort of advice do you have to impart to people who are thinking about doing the same thing, entrepreneurs? Is it worth it?
Oh, I think so. I'm a little biased, but I've had an amazing time. Even when things were hard, it was worth it. And I think just the amount that you get to grow, the amount you get to build is incredible. I think the advice, going back to your question, if I was to give someone that's starting off today, and I was very fortunate with the Teal Fellowship to have some space to really work and innovate. But what the Teal Fellowship taught me was just think big and to really swing for the fences rather than trying to work on something that's small and local. It's so tempting because you think that something small is going to be maybe easier than like the really big thing. But it turns out they can both be just as hard, but with a lot more impact on the large thing.
Peter Thiel is a controversial character, as you know. What did you learn from him? What are some things maybe you didn't want to take away from that experience? Tell us both sides.
Oh, I mean, there's like hundreds of Teal Fellows now, and there's 20 per year. It's been going for 10 years. So I don't know Peter super well, but I've been thankful for the time I spent with him, and definitely thankful for the program. But yeah, I don't have any like unlessons.
So talk to us about the big vision. Obviously, you're a $10 billion company now, but the ambition is bigger. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for growth?
Yes, I mean, as we think about that vision of making design accessible to all, and we think about the design process, we're really excited to take people all the way from brainstorming and ideation, that first spark of an idea, all the way to designing, creating a design system, prototyping ideas, seeing if they work, doing the research behind it, presenting ideas to stakeholders, all the way to code and production. And we think if we can get that entire cycle, then it'll make it so that everyone's able to spend the design cycle inside of Figma, and hopefully that creativity never leaves you. We're making it so you're not inhibited in the creative process, and all throughout it, you're able to go through Figma.
Now, a lot of the collaboration is happening on desktops and laptops, and people want more mobile features. How much is that part of the plan?
Yeah, we actually just launched a beta of our iPhone as well as Android mobile applications. That makes it so you're able to browse and comment and have conversation on design better. But we're hoping to do more mobile in the future, so stay tuned.
What makes that difficult? I mean, obviously, it's a hard problem, right? Porting a product that's so good on desktop to your phone.
Well, when we get nitty-gritty on the design of it, I think it's really interesting to think about how do you make it so that when you're going from one platform to another, you're making it native to that platform and not just taking the same metaphors and moving them over. So that's why we don't rush these things. But also, I think that most designers are at their desks most of the time. Perhaps in another world, you'll be at the beach designing your next iteration of your product, but I don't think we're quite there yet. Maybe with remote work, though, that we'll get there.
Well, that was my last question because, as there are so many companies trying to figure out their remote work plan, and it's scary, and, some people want, CEOs want people back in the office. Workers are rebelling. How are you balancing that, and what's your plan for Figma getting back to work in the office?
So about a year ago, we shipped a blog post that basically outlined our strategy, and it's their strategy today. And that is to be a hybrid model, to make it so that you're able to either choose to be at a hub or remote. If you're at a hub, you are committing to going to the office 2 days a week. It's the same 2 days for everyone. That makes it so that you have more serendipitous connections and you're able to just connect across teams more. And if you're remote, then that's great. You are pay localized, and we can only do it in some areas, not the entire world. But we do the entire continent of the United States right now, for example.
All right, so if you're thinking about dropping out of college, should you do it? What's the answer?
I don't know. I think it's dependent on everyone's individual situation, and I wouldn't give a blanket answer, but I think if you've got an idea and you're really excited to pursue it, it could be a really great way to learn is to go pursue that, and college will probably be there later.
All right. Dylan Field, Figma co-founder and CEO. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. Some other stories we are watching now. YouTube trying to grab a larger slice of the e-commerce market. The world's largest video platform has been hosting a live stream shopping event for small business operators where viewers can buy products directly. Alphabet's Google has also bolstered its online retail ambitions by deepening its partnership with Shopify. And Snap has struck a licensing deal with the world's top record label. The agreement with Universal Music will give users access to thousands of songs, including tracks from Taylor Swift and Drake. They can be used in messages and posts within the app. Music fans can also share links to full songs from their streaming service of choice. And speaking of Peter Thiel, the billionaire amassed $5 billion in his Roth IRA account. We're going to talk about how the PayPal co-founder legally skipped out on paying taxes on all those gains. And shares of AMD and Xilinx both gaining, AMD skipping a deadline to offer any concessions in the EU's review of the takeover of Xilinx. This could be a sign the $35 billion deal may be approved unconditionally next week. This is Bloomberg. Cryptocurrency exchange run by Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss, trying to make the industry more sustainable. Gemini Trust has purchased about $4 million in credits to help offset the carbon emissions footprint of the Bitcoin it currently holds. CEO Tyler Winklevoss saying the company will continue to do this until only renewable energy is used in securing the Bitcoin network. And Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal, accumulated nearly $5 billion in his Roth IRA, according to a report by ProPublica, raising concerns and questions about what kind of regulation should come from the IRS. Our Bloomberg News personal finance reporter, Ben Steverman, has been following the story. So how did Peter Thiel manage to do this, Ben? And was it all legal?
It's a really good question. So ProPublica has this trove of tax documents, and what they say has happened here is that Peter Thiel took shares, almost 2 million shares of PayPal in the late 90s, and put it into this Roth IRA. Now, background on Roth IRAs are different from traditional. What you do with a Roth is you take pre-tax dollars, you put them in, and then any investment gains are tax-free for the rest of your life, if you're able to get money in there. But there's some guidelines and barriers where you're really, back in the 90s, you're only able to contribute $2,000 a year to a Roth IRA, and there were income limits on it, so only middle-class people could do it. What Thiel was able to do was take these shares. It was less than $2,000 worth of them, but there were 2 million of them, and they were valued at only a tenth of a cent each. And within a year, they were worth millions. And then he was able to turn that PayPal fortune into investments in Facebook, which he also made through this Roth IRA, and then Palantir. So he now has $5 billion, according to ProPublica, in the account.
So I asked Senator Amy Klobuchar about this earlier. She called this and other ways the wealthy have used the tax code to get wealthier outrageous. But what can or will the IRS do about this?
Part of the issue here is, were these shares that Peter Thiel put in this IRA back in the 90s, was he valuing them correctly, or was PayPal valuing them correctly at the time? That's open to question, but the problem is that the IRS just doesn't have the resources to go in and look at all these transactions and fight with rich people who have very expensive lawyers over all these valuations. And you remember back in the 90s, there were tons of people in Silicon Valley who were starting tech companies, probably putting those shares into Roth IRAs at the time as well, and a lot of those ended up being worthless. So one issue here is the funding of the IRS and whether we really have cops on the beat keeping an eye on these transactions. The other thing that's being discussed is maybe we need to have a size limit on these Roth IRAs. They're supposed to be for middle-class people. Ron Wyden, the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, has proposed in the past capping the size of them at about $5 million, and he says he might, based on this story, he says he is planning to revisit that proposal and reissue that proposal, and it possibly could be included in some kind of tax reform that passes this year.
Interesting. Well, it makes you wonder how many other tech billionaires might have some billions stashed away in Roth IRAs, and I'm sure folks are working on finding that out. Bloomberg News reporter Ben Steverman, thanks so much for bringing us that story. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. We'll be joined by Michael Saylor, the CEO of MicroStrategy. You do not want to miss that conversation. One of the world's biggest Bitcoin bulls. This is Bloomberg.